August 1840. Before dawn, Central Texas. The prairie is still. Not silent, never silent, but still. Wind sighs through tall grass, bending the blades in slow, rippling waves. A few distant coyotes trade thin, eerie calls across the darkness. Above, the moon hangs low, dimmed by a crawling curtain of clouds. It is a strange, heavy night, one of those nights where every shadow feels alive, where every shape carries a secret. 40 men sit together on a ridgeline, their silhouettes barely visible in the gray light. Dust coats their coats, their faces, even their eyelashes. Their horses shift nervously beneath them, sensing something in the wind, something coming. The men are Texans, Texas Rangers, but they don't look like any polished soldiers from the pages of a storybook. Their hats are sweat-stained, their coats mismatched, their boots patched together with rawhide. Some are only boys. Some are grizzled, silent men with haunted eyes. All of them know they should not be here, because somewhere out there, somewhere beyond the tall grass and drifting moonlight, rides an army, not a band, not a war party, an army. 600 Comanche warriors, the finest horsemen on earth, fresh from the largest raid ever launched against the Republic of Texas. Fast, violent, and unstoppable, the Comanche have left a trail of burning settlements behind them, a smoking scar across the Texas frontier. Now those warriors are heading home, back to the plains, carrying plunder, horses, weapons, captives, and the Rangers intend to stop them. They know the numbers, they know the odds, and still they wait. A young ranger named Thomas Harris breaks the silence. "Captain," he whispers, "they'll be here soon." The man in front, broad-shouldered, calm even in this monstrous dark, nods. His name is Captain Jack Hayes, a man who has fought the Comanche more times than he can remember, a man who has survived battles no one should have walked out of. Hayes doesn't speak, he doesn't need to. The Rangers tighten their grips on their Sharps carbines. They adjust their saddles. One man, barely 18, mutters a prayer. Another kisses the silver locket around his neck. The horizon gives a soft, trembling glow. Dust, stirred up by hundreds of hooves. And then, like a tidal wave swallowing the earth, they appear. Comanche, row after row after row of mounted warriors, a living force of speed, fury, and absolute precision. 600 of them, 40 Rangers. The impossible stand is about to begin. Before we continue, if stories like this, stories of doomed battles, impossible odds, and moments where history hangs by a thread, pull you in, then let me know. These videos take time and heart to create, and your support brings them to life. Now, let's step back. Because to understand this battle, this suicidal confrontation, you must first understand the world that created it, the world of the Comanche Empire, and the fragile, blood-stained birth of Texas. Long before Americans, Mexicans, or Texans fought over the frontier, the land belonged to one power, one nation, feared from the Arkansas to the Rio Grande. The Comanche, their rise was not accidental. It was not luck. It was evolution, sharp, violent, and perfectly suited to the raw brutality of the Great Plains. When the Comanche mastered the horse, truly mastered it, they became something the world had never seen. Warriors who could ride at full speed, lean completely off one side of their horse, and fire arrows with deadly accuracy under the animal's neck. They could fire 6 arrows in the time a man with a musket could load 1 shot. To fight a Comanche on flat ground was suicide. To chase a Comanche was impossible. To escape a Comanche was unlikely. They dominated, they raided, they ruled, and they did it with a simplicity and honesty that made their power even more terrifying. Strength was survival. Weakness meant destruction. For decades, the Comanche shattered Spanish settlements, ravaged Mexican ranches, and shattered any frontier naive enough to creep into their lands. By the 1830s, the newly formed Republic of Texas was just the latest guest at the table, and the Comanche had no intention of sharing. The Texas Rangers were not heroes, not saints, not knights on horseback. They were problem solvers on the bleeding edge of existence. The Republic of Texas didn't have money, didn't have armies, didn't have infrastructure. What it had were volunteers, men who lived on the frontier, understood its dangers, and were reckless enough to confront them. The ranger companies were small, poorly supplied, barely organized, but they were effective because they adapted. They learned to fight like the Comanche. They learned to scout like them, ride like them, disappear like them. Captain Jack Hayes was the best of them, but even he had limits, and 600 Comanche warriors was well beyond any sane limit. It began with smoke, a lot of smoke. In August 1840, several Comanche tribes, angered by a disastrous, failed peace negotiation, where several of their chiefs were killed, united under war leaders Buffalo Hump and Yellow Wolf. Their plan was simple: burn the Texas Texas frontier to the ground. And they very nearly did. They struck the coastal towns first, Victoria, then Linville, looting warehouses, stealing hundreds of horses, and tearing through settlements too small, too scattered, or too terrified to stop them. By the time word spread, entire communities were already ash raining down on the prairie. Texans panicked, settlers fled, militia companies formed and collapsed. And on a ridge overlooking the path of this massive retreat, one man watched, Jack Hayes. He saw the smoke, he saw the horse herds, he saw the size of the Comanche force, and he said 9 words that even his men couldn't believe. "We're going to stop them before they reach home." The Rangers protested. Some begged him to reconsider. Others simply stared at him like he'd lost his mind. But Hayes understood something they didn't. If the Comanche got away with this raid, if 600 warriors returned home unchallenged, victorious and swollen with plunder, Texas would fall apart. Fear would destroy the Republic faster than any army. He wasn't riding out to win, he was riding out to change the story. And so the 40 headed west, following a trail of burned homes and trampled earth. Every hour the enemy herd grew closer. Every hour the Rangers' odds shrank. And still they rode. By the night of August 11th, the Rangers had caught up. They chose high ground, an uneven ridge dotted with cedar and limestone boulders. Not ideal, but better than flat prairie. Below them, the Comanche camp stretched outward like a living sea. Fires burned low. Horses grazed. Warriors slept beside their weapons, ready to move at the slightest alarm. The Rangers dismounted, ate what little they had, sharpened knives, checked guns, whispered to their horses. That night, some of the men wrote final letters no one would ever deliver. Others tried to sleep. A few sat perfectly still, staring at the horizon where the moonlight touched the grasslands. Captain Hayes walked among them, saying little, but every man felt it, the gravity of dawn. They would make their stand here, alone, outnumbered 15 to 1. A young ranger asked a seasoned veteran, "You think we make it out?" The older man spat, wiped his mouth, then answered, "Son, the way I see it, either we make history tomorrow." He paused. "Or we become it." The sky brightens, the wind shifts, horses snort nervously, and then, drums? No. Hoofbeats? Dozens, hundreds. The Comanche are mounting. The Rangers take positions, carbines ready, hands steady, hearts pounding like war drums. Captain Hayes raises his hand. The first wave begins to move. Dawn was not a sunrise that morning. It was a slow, suffocating reveal. Light creeping over the prairie like a curtain being lifted on a stage, already soaked in fear. The Rangers felt it long before they saw anything. The horses sensed it too, tossing their heads, stamping the ground, muscles quivering with instincts older than any frontier or nation. For a moment, just a moment, the ridge was quiet. The world held its breath. Then it came. A distant rumble, faint at first, like thunder on the far edge of the sky. It rolled across the grasslands, vibrating through the ground, through the horse hooves, through the bones of every man trembling behind his rifle. Hoofbeats, hundreds. The Rangers tightened their grips. Some whispered prayers. Some clenched their teeth, refusing to let the moment break them. Captain Hayes scanned the horizon, calm in a way that should not have been human. He had heard this sound before, too many times. He knew what followed it. The first line of Comanche appeared like spirits rising from the land itself. They burst over a rise, galloping in a loose formation, shirtless young warriors painted in colors of war, their hair braided, their faces streaked with crimson and coal. They rode with perfect unity, each man a part of a larger organism, each motion fluid and deadly. The Rangers had seen Comanche riders before, but no man, no matter how many battles he had survived, could ever truly get used to the sight of them at full charge. They were beautiful, terrifying, living proof that the plains produced warriors unlike any in the world. One ranger whispered, "My God, there's so many." Another answered, "We ain't seen nothing yet." He wasn't wrong. Beyond that first wave, the land moved, literally moved, as hundreds more horsemen rose over the hills, their silhouettes cresting like rolling storms. Sunlight glinted off lances, shields, bows, rifles, and the polished skull caps some war chiefs wore into battle. 600 riders, 40 rangers. The arithmetic hurt to look at. Captain Hayes lowered his hand, slowly, purposefully. The battle began. The first volley was a crackling snap of smoke and flame exploding from the ridge. Rangers fired with discipline, not fear. Every shot aimed, every trigger pulled with intent. Carbines bucked against shoulders. Muzzle flashes stabbed through the pale dawn. Comanche riders twisted sideways across their horses' flanks, using the animals as shields. Others leaned so low their faces were inches from the ground. Arrows streaked through the air in counter-volley, whistling like angry spirits. A ranger named Matthew Price was the first to fall, an arrow striking so deep it lifted him off his feet before he collapsed in the dust. His friend beside him cursed, firing again and again until his rifle clicked empty. It didn't matter. The Comanche kept coming. They rode with a confidence bordering on invincibility. And why wouldn't they? They had crushed settlements, outrun militias, torn through entire towns. They were warriors warriors raised in a world where hesitation meant death, trained from childhood to ride, hunt, and kill with an elegance most soldiers could never dream of. The Rangers had chosen a ridge for one reason: to break the initial charge, to force the Comanche to ride uphill, slowing them just enough for the rifles to bite into their momentum. For a few seconds, maybe 20, the plan worked. Warriors fell, horses stumbled, the charge thinned, then it reformed, tighter, angrier, faster. The second wave hit the ridge with a roar that shook the bones of the earth. Horses thundered into the slope, arrows rained down. The Rangers were forced to fire, duck, reload, and fire again in a rhythm that became chaos. A ranger named O'Malley yelled, "They're trying to cut our flank." Another shouted, "Hold the line! Hold the damn line!" Men bled, men screamed, men refused to break. The Comanche surged toward the weak points, probing for openings with terrifying intelligence. This was not a reckless mob. It was a coordinated attack, led by chiefs who had fought the Spanish, Mexicans, and Texans for decades. At the front of the second wave rode a warrior on a paint horse, his chest painted bone white, a single eagle feather tied into his braid. He charged straight at the Rangers, firing arrows with lightning speed. Two struck a ranger square in the arm and chest before the warrior veered away, vanishing behind the ridge's far side. Another wave followed him, and another, and another. The Rangers fought like men who understood their place in the story. If they fell here, in this lonely patch of Texas earth, then the Comanche raid would go down in history as the final blow to an already fragile republic. Texas would dissolve into fear and flight. Settlers would flee east. Towns would crumble. The frontier would become a graveyard no one dared reclaim. They weren't fighting just to survive. They were fighting to hold the line between existence and erasure. But courage doesn't stop arrows. Determination doesn't slow horses. And by mid-morning, the truth was unavoidable. The Rangers were losing ground. Their ammunition was dwindling. Their horses were spooked and sweating. Their arms burned from firing and reloading. Their eyes stung with smoke and dust. Captain Hayes saw it all with brutal clarity. He rode along the line, shouting over the chaos, "Slow your fire! Make your shots count! Watch the flanks!" A bullet grazed his hat. He didn't flinch. One ranger, shaking, gasped, "Captain! We can't hold much longer." Hayes grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. "Yes, you can, but they're everywhere. Then we shoot 'em everywhere." The ranger swallowed, nodded, and reloaded with trembling hands. But beneath Hayes' hard exterior, he felt the truth clawing at him. This ridge would not hold forever. Soon the Comanche would surround them fully. Soon their ammunition would run out. Soon their horses would panic. Soon the ridge would become a tomb. He looked out over the chaos, scanning for something, anything that could shift the tide. He found nothing, not yet. Below the ridge, the Comanche reorganized again, preparing for a larger, heavier assault. Riders circled like wolves closing in for the kill. War cries rose in a chilling chorus, echoing across the grasslands. The sound wasn't just loud, it was ancient, carrying generations of vengeance, pride, and unbroken dominance. A ranger named Collins muttered, voice cracking, "They're gonna rush us again, from all sides this time." "They will," Hayes answered. "So when they do, we hit 'em harder." Collins stared at him. "With what?" Hayes didn't answer, because he didn't know. The sun climbed. The heat grew. Sweat rolled down backs and brows. Blood dried on shirts and hands. The ground was littered with spent shells, broken arrows, splintered wood, and the still, motionless bodies of horses, both Comanche and Ranger. The Comanche began to move again, this time slower, methodical, a tightening noose. One ranger whispered, "This is it." Another murmured, "God, I ain't ready." Captain Hayes rode to the center of the line. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Listen up. They think we're weak. They think we're scared. They think we're just men." He paused. "But we ain't just men. We're rangers. And this ridge right here, this dirt, this rock, this little piece of Texas, belongs to us. They want it. They'll have to come tear it out of our dead hands." A silence fell among the men, a hard silence, the kind that forms when despair gives way to something more dangerous, defiance. Hayes raised his rifle. The Comanche charged. If the earlier assaults were storms, this one was a hurricane, a swirling wall of riders coming from three directions at once, arrows slicing through the air, rifles cracking, lances lowered, horses foam-mouthed and flying across the ground. The Rangers braced for impact, and then a sound cut through the air that froze the blood of every man on the ridge. A horn, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The Rangers stared westward. A new column of riders was approaching, fast. At first, the Rangers didn't believe the sound was real. Battle does strange things to a man's senses. In the heat of chaos, smoke burning your lungs, adrenaline flooding your blood, death singing inches from your face. Your mind begins to create hope out of noise. A creak becomes a voice, a breeze becomes a warning, a distant animal call becomes salvation. So when that horn sounded across the prairie, thin, wavering, almost swallowed by the roar of the Comanche charge, many rangers simply refused to acknowledge it. They thought it was their minds cracking, imagination, madness brought on by fear. But then it sounded again, clearer, louder, closer, a single, cutting note, sharp as a knife, bright as thunder. A ranger named Dawson was the first to gasp. That's a bugle. Another shouted, "Cavalry, it's gotta be cavalry!" But Captain Hayes didn't celebrate. Not yet. His eyes narrowed as he looked to the west, where sunlight shimmered off distant movement. At first he saw only shapes, dust, shadows, blurred silhouettes. But within heartbeats, the shapes resolved into horses, dozens of them, riders charging hard, sunlight glinting off weapons and tack. More dust rose behind them, a rolling wake of movement across the earth. Someone screamed, "Reinforcements! We got reinforcements!" A wave of desperate joy surged through the Rangers. But just as quickly, Hayes barked, "Hold your line! Don't break formation!" Because the Comanche had heard the horn too, and their reaction was not fear, not hesitation, not retreat. It was fury. Their charge intensified. Lances dropped even lower, war cries shrilling, hooves pounding harder as they surged up the ridge in a last-ditch effort to break the Rangers before new enemies joined the fight. They didn't want reinforcements to matter. They wanted 40 Rangers dead before anyone could intervene. And they were close, very close. The final wave struck the ridge like the collision of two worlds. Horses slammed into brush and rock. Warriors leapt from their saddles to fight hand to hand. Arrows hissed past ears. Rifles fired at point-blank range. Men grappled, punched, stabbed, clawed. Dust rose in choking clouds. The screams became a single, wordless mass of agony and defiance. Hayes fired until his rifle emptied, then drew his Colt, firing again and again, each shot cracking through the chaos like lightning. A Comanche warrior lunged at him with a lance, missing by inches as Hayes's horse reared and kicked, sending the warrior tumbling backwards. To his left, Sergeant Lewis wrestled on the ground with a Comanche fighter, each man snarling like beasts. Lewis's knife flashed. The warrior's hatchet fell. Blood sprayed across the stones. The young ranger Harris, the one who had whispered before dawn, found himself face to face with a rider whose paint-streaked face seemed carved with rage. Harris raised his rifle too slowly. The warrior's arrow struck him in the thigh before he could fire. Harris cried out, but kept fighting. The ridge was no longer a defensive position. It was a battlefield so intimate, so claustrophobic, that men could smell each other's breath as they killed. Still, the Comanche pressed. Still, the Rangers refused to break. But even with reinforcements nearing, the truth remained carved into every second of the fight. The Rangers were exhausted, outnumbered, bleeding, running on instinct and desperation. Another few minutes, maybe less, and the line would finally collapse. Then the new riders finally arrived. Not cavalry, not soldiers, not uniforms or command structures. They were a mixed force, volunteers, ranchers, militia riders, and a handful of hardened frontiersmen, men who had been chasing the Comanche raid for days, just like the Rangers. They had ridden through the night to catch up, fighting exhaustion with sheer will. They were not many, 40, maybe 50, barely enough to change the tide. But to the 40 Rangers being swallowed alive on the ridge, it looked like salvation itself. They crashed into the Comanche flank with ferocity born of rage. Rage for burned homes, massacred families, stolen herds. Their rifles boomed, their horses slammed into the fray, their war cries, ragged, furious, joined the chaos. For the first time all morning, the Comanche momentum faltered, not broken, just slowed. A momentary hesitation, a shift in the current of the fight. Hayes saw it instantly. He raised his voice over the battle, shouting, "Now push 'em off the ridge!" The Rangers surged forward as one. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't coordinated, it wasn't even tactical, it was personal. The 40 descended the ridge, in a roaring counterattack, firing their remaining ammunition, swinging rifle stocks like clubs, drawing blades, tackling riders off their horses in explosions of dust and rage. For a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, the Comanche force recoiled, but they did not break. These were warriors of the plains, men raised from childhood to endure pain, loss, and the harshness of a world that gave nothing freely. They reorganized with frightening speed. Chiefs bellowed orders. Riders regrouped. Lines reformed. The battle expanded outward across the prairie, a sprawling, chaotic storm of horses and dust and men locked in brutal conflict. Hayes and his Rangers fought shoulder to shoulder with the militia newcomers, every blow fueled by exhaustion and fury. and the knowledge that survival hung by a thread. A warrior on a black horse charged Hayes with a raised lance. Hayes twisted in his saddle, ducked the thrust, and fired point-blank into the warrior's chest. The man fell, his horse rearing before galloping away in panic. To Hayes's right, a ranger named Kellerman slashed with his bowie knife at two warriors attacking him simultaneously. He took an arrow to the shoulder, but he didn't fall. He didn't even cry out. He just kept fighting, blood soaking his shirt, eyes burning. Men were collapsing everywhere. Comanche, rangers, militia, frontiersmen. The prairie drank deeply, but gradually, painfully, the tide shifted. The Comanche had accomplished their objective. They had gathered plunder, horses, and captives. They had burned towns and shattered settlements. Their losses were rising now, and their return path to the plains was at risk of being cut off. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to withdraw, not in panic, not in defeat, with dignity, warriors refusing to show weakness. Their riders peeled away in groups, forming a protective screen as they retreated toward the open plains where no enemy could hope to pursue them. And just like that, it was over. Not victory, not triumph, just the end. The Rangers did not cheer. They did not raise fists or shout glory. They simply collapsed, some to their knees, some to the ground, some leaning against their horses with trembling arms. The ridge was quiet again, the prairie still, the air heavy with smoke and dust and the metallic sting of blood. Hayes dismounted slowly. He walked among his men, checking wounds, whispering comfort, gripping shoulders. He moved like a man twice his age now, each step dragging, each breath brittle. Harris, the young ranger, sat with a bloody bandage tied around his thigh. When Hayes knelt beside him, Harris tried to smile. Did we win, Captain?" Hayes looked at the horizon where the Comanche force retreated, still proud, still powerful, still undefeated in spirit. Then he looked back at Harris. "No," he said softly. "No one wins days like this." He placed a hand on the boy's chest, right over his heart. "But we survived. And on the Texas frontier, survival was the closest thing to victory anyone could hope for. Word of the impossible stand would spread in time. Settlers would tell it as legend. Newspapers would twist it into triumph. Politicians would use it as proof of Texas grit. But the men who lived it would never glamorize it. They knew the truth. 40 Rangers stood against 600 Comanche horse warriors. They were not stronger, not braver, not even luckier. They were simply there, at the right moment, on the right ridge, with the right amount of desperation to keep Texas from collapsing into terror. The frontier was built on moments like this, moments where survival depended not on glory, but on grit, hard enough to break teeth. Moments where a handful of men stared into the abyss and refused to look away. And as the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the wounded prairie, Captain Jack Hayes mounted his tired, dust-covered horse. He surveyed the land, the sky, the faces of the men who had followed him into hell. Then he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "We ride home, because tomorrow, danger would rise again. Tomorrow, smoke would rise from somewhere else. Tomorrow, the frontier would bleed anew. But for this single day, just this one, Texas still stood, and so did the men who held the line.